Picture a casual Friday evening. A group of friends around a table, takeout containers open, someone's playlist running in the background. The conversation is easy. You are laughing at the right moments, agreeing where it feels expected, steering away from anything that might create friction. Nobody is unhappy. The evening ends well. You drive home, or you close the app, or you put your phone down, and somewhere in the quiet that follows, a small, strange flatness settles in. Nothing went wrong, and yet something feels slightly off. That feeling is worth following. There is a version of social life that looks, from every external angle, like success. You are well liked. You are easy to be around. People include you, message you, speak warmly about you. But underneath the smooth surface of all that approval, something quieter is happening. You have been editing yourself, not dramatically, not all at once, but in small, almost invisible increments, until the person showing up in those conversations is a carefully managed version of you rather than the actual one. This is not a crisis. It does not announce itself, it accumulates. Alfred Adler, the Austrian psychologist whose work on human nature still carries remarkable weight, spent much of his career examining the ways people respond to feelings of inferiority and the deep human need to belong. His insight was not that these feelings are weaknesses. They are nearly universal. The question he kept returning to was what we do with them. Some people respond by shrinking, making themselves smaller so they take up less space and attract less criticism. Others respond by overreaching, performing, dominating, trying to prove their worth through achievement or status. And some, perhaps the most quietly exhausted of all, respond by becoming endlessly agreeable, shaping themselves around whatever the room seems to want. Adler argued that genuine belonging is not the same as being accepted. Acceptance can be purchased with compliance. Belonging, the real kind, requires you to actually be present, which means bringing something of yourself into the room, including the parts that might not be universally applauded. That distinction is easy to miss when you are young, and it is easy to keep missing it for a very long time. Think about how the pattern usually starts. Somewhere early in life, you learned that a certain version of you was more welcome than others. Maybe directness caused tension. Maybe having strong opinions made the atmosphere uncomfortable. Maybe the people around you were easier to be with when you were agreeable, when you laughed things off, when you did not push back. You were not making a conscious decision. You were adapting, the way children do, to the emotional climate around you. The adaptation worked. People responded warmly. Conflict decreased. You felt in those moments something that resembled safety. The problem is that adaptations designed for one environment do not always serve you well when the environment changes. What began as a reasonable response to a specific situation can harden into a default setting. A way of moving through the world that you no longer choose consciously because it has become automatic. And automatic patterns are the hardest ones to examine because they feel like personality rather than habit. Here is where it gets subtle. The person who has learned to prioritize being liked does not usually experience themselves as performing. They experience themselves as being considerate, as keeping the peace, as being a good friend or a reliable colleague. These are not false descriptions. The behavior often is considerate. The peace often is kept. But there is a cost running underneath all of it that rarely gets named. The cost is this. Every time you choose the version of yourself that will be better received over the version that is actually true, you create a small gap. And small gaps, repeated often enough, become distances. You can end up standing in a room full of people who genuinely like you and feel, with complete accuracy, that none of them really know you. That is not their failure. They like what you showed them. You showed them something real enough to be likable, but not quite real enough to be known. This shows up in specific recognizable ways. You laugh at a comment you actually found unkind because the group laughed. You agree with an opinion you privately disagree with because the disagreement feels like too much effort. You downplay something you are proud of because enthusiasm might seem like too much. You stay in conversations that drain you because leaving feels rude. You post the version of your life that will generate warmth rather than the version that is actually happening. None of these moments feel significant on their own. but they add up to a life that is being lived slightly to the side of yourself. Friedrich Nietzsche, writing from a very different angle, was preoccupied with the question of what it costs a person to live according to values they have absorbed, rather than values they have genuinely chosen. He was not gentle about it, but the underlying observation is worth sitting with. There is a difference between a life that is yours and a life that has been assembled from other people's expectations of you. The difference is not always visible from the outside. It is felt from the inside. James Allen, whose writing on the relationship between thought and character remains quietly useful, made a similar point in a quieter register. The inner life shapes the outer life. What you habitually think about yourself, whether you believe your actual presence is welcome, whether you trust that your real opinions have value, determines how you show up, and whether you show up at all. So, what does any of this have to do with the flatness you felt driving home from that perfectly pleasant evening? It has everything to do with it, because the flatness is information. It is the part of you that noticed the gap between the person who was present at that table and the person who drove home afterward. It is not depression. It is not ingratitude. It is a signal that something real in you did not get to participate. Adler's framework offers something genuinely useful here, and it is not a demand for radical self-expression or confrontation. His argument was that courage, the kind that actually builds a life, grows through contribution and through treating yourself as someone whose presence has equal worth. Not superior worth, equal worth. You do not need to dominate the room. You do not need to perform, but you do need to show up as a participant rather than as a mirror reflecting back whatever the room wants to see. That is a smaller shift than it sounds, and a harder one than it sounds. It might look like this. The next time you have an opinion that differs from the group's, you say it, not aggressively, not as a challenge, but simply as your honest perspective. The next time someone asks how you are doing, you give an answer that is slightly more true than the automatic one. The next time you're about to laugh at something you did not find funny, you let your face stay neutral instead. These are not dramatic acts. They will not transform your social life overnight, but they are acts of participation rather than performance. And participation, done consistently, is how the gap closes. The goal is not to become someone who is harder to be around. The goal is to become someone who is actually there, present enough that when people like you, they are liking something real. That kind of being liked feels different. It is quieter, sometimes. It involves more friction, occasionally, but it does not leave you with that particular flatness on the drive home. Because the version of you that showed up was actually you, and that, in the end, is the only version worth being known. And if this spoke to a part of you that rarely gets heard, stay with that feeling for a moment. You are not broken because you feel deeply. You are only beginning to understand yourself. Subscribe to Inside the Labyrinth for more reflections on the hidden patterns of the human mind.